This podcast is part of the SJ Network. Go to s-j-network.com for more great podcasts and for contact information on publicist Steve Joyner.
You are listening to In a City Like Yours, a semi-monthly podcast featuring interesting people with interesting life stories. This podcast may contain language and/or subject matter not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
I'm your host, Michael Glenn Moore. If you have an interesting life story and would like to appear on the show, please drop me a note at inacityLikeYours@gmail.com. Also, join our Facebook page at In a City Like Yours Podcast to receive notices of new releases and other info. Now, please welcome today's guest.
Hello, Michael. My name is Scott Hopkins. I'm calling from the city of Chula Vista, California, which is just south of San Diego, about 5 miles north of the Mexican border at Tijuana. I'm a retired elementary school teacher who started way back in the 1970s and finished in the year 2009. So quite a span of years there in the classroom. Going back to my early days, I was a journalism major. I was doing really well with that. I was the editor of our high school sports section in our newspaper. And that was kind of my career goal for a long time. I started umpiring Little League Baseball. And that gave me a second interest in, teaching. And when I started out at San Diego State University, I was a journalism major and I was doing really well. I had straight A's in all the classes, and some of the classes that the other students couldn't figure out and got stumped by, I was still cruising. And after a couple of years, I was offered the job as the news editor of the Daily Aztec newspaper. And along about that time, I changed majors. And the story of how I changed majors is kind of interesting, I think, because had I not done that, my life would have taken a completely different turn, I believe. When I got to a class called Advanced News Writing, we had a great professor. He was a legend in the journalism department at San Diego State. His name was Dr. James Julian, and they even have a scholarship named after him today. But he had written his own little wire-bound textbook, which was a compilation of field notes from reporters. It could have been things like a traffic accident, a house fire, drowning at the beach, all kinds of these things that a local reporter might go out on. And he would walk into the class at 11 o'clock and just write a page number on the board and walk out. So our job was to look into his book at the notes on that page, decipher what the incident was about, the details of it, and then write the story, have it completely done and on his desk at 11:50 when the class ended. So obviously it was designed to put us under pressure. And the very first thing about 90% of the students did back in those days was pull out cigarettes and light up. And I'm a post-asthma person, and I was dying. The environment was just miserable. I did everything I could to get my stories in. I got great grades on the stories. But the environment made me think that was what my career was going to be like, sitting in small rooms, breathing cigarette smoke. So that was the actual reason that I went down and changed majors. The department chair was really surprised when I came in to do the change and tried to talk me out of it. But I said, no, I was quite, sure that I wanted to do this. And I went into a major of social sciences, a generic major, for the purpose of teaching. Had I stayed with the journalism, I might have been able to achieve my life's dream, I think, which was to become a sportscaster. And this was in the era right before cable TV appeared. And if some of your listeners think back, if they're as old as I am, I'm 70 years old, Back in the 1970s, there was one professional football game on Sunday, one baseball game on, maybe on a given weekend day or whatever, and the television thing was very limited. After cable hit, and nowadays, as people are familiar with and are comfortable and used to, every single game is televised. At college, professional, everything is televised, and the need for broadcasters has just skyrocketed. So some of those people are former professional players, and that wouldn't have been me, but I think I could have been one of those guys that made it by his knowledge of the sports and his ability to describe the action on the field and keep the viewers interested. And I will never know if I could have done that or not. In the meantime, ironically, after I retired from teaching, I went back to writing again, and I now am a contributor to a community newspaper for the same high school that I went to as a student in San Diego, named Point Loma High School. And I cover their sports, interesting students, developments at the school, all kinds of activities and things that go on around a modern high school. So I've kind of come full circle back to the journalism, but with about a 35-year teaching career that interrupted it. No sports broadcasting, unfortunately, but lots of interesting stories about today's kids that are growing up. So that's basically the quick story on how I got into teaching. I went to San Diego State, like I said, and even though I changed majors, I still graduated in 4 years. And in those days, the California credential law said that if you did your student teaching as a graduate student, you were given a full lifetime credential that you never had to go back and update. If you didn't, you had to complete a 5th year of college during your first 5 years in the classroom. So that prevented me from having to do that after work classroom thing. I started at a higher salary, and that was how I got my credential. My first teaching job was in the San Diego Unified School District, which is the second biggest school district in the state behind Los Angeles. And I was sent to a school in a minority community where they had known that the classroom was going to be empty. The teacher had left, but they didn't hire anybody to replace the teacher. They waited till school started and hired a sub, who was me. It was a gifted class for 6th grade students. And after about 5 weeks of school, one of the staff members was convinced into taking the class. He left his class, somebody else took his class, but I was offered to stay on with an opening that came up. So I was there for a year. And at the end of the first year, what San Diego Unified did back then, every single first and second year teacher in the district, no matter if you were the best teacher in the school or whatever, all were pink slipped and basically cut loose. You're a free agent. And I was headed to Europe for a vacation that summer, and I came back from Europe, and the day I got back, the Chula Vista Elementary School District called and asked if I wanted to sub over the summer in what they call intersession classes, summer school classes, things like that. So I jumped at that, and that next September I got into a 6th grade class in Chula Vista where my career continued. I was in Chula Vista, I was replacing a very popular teacher who was transferring schools over the summer. However, in the spring at his previous school, he'd been diagnosed with cancer. And they were concerned that he wasn't going to make it very much longer. His life expectancy was quite short, but his family didn't want to tell him about that. So they had me go over to his home and sit down next to him at his bed and listen to his instructions on how to start the class off and how to behave the first, weeks of school. And he looked at me and said, "Do you have a credential?" I said, "Yes, I do, sir." And how old are you? And I said, "I'm 23. And okay, I guess so. And he kind of like couldn't believe I was, going to take his place. But his wife and their friends actually carried this guy over to the classroom and set him down in a chair, and he would tell them what color of bulletin board background paper to put up and how to arrange the desks and things like that for the opening of school. But unfortunately, he actually passed in about mid-October after the school year started. And I had started the class off in September, and the school district was kind enough to write my new contract retroactive to the first day of school. And that gave me my seniority date. And that date lasted the rest of my career until the year 2009. This was in 1973. So.
Wow, 30-year career. That's really something to stay at something that long. You must have been very, very passionate about what you were doing.
Well, I was. And my days at that first school in San Diego opened my eyes to a lot of things. The school was interesting. It was what they called naturally integrated, in that it had 1/3 white, 1/3 black, and 1/3 Hispanic students. So in talking to these kids, I noticed, of course, they love sports. They love the San Diego Chargers and the Padres, but a lot of these kids had never seen the stadium in San Diego. They talked about the beach. They'd never been to the beach. And I kind of decided, wow, maybe that's something I can do to change a little bit. And so back then I started trying to take small groups of kids off to see things like that and experience a little bit more of life. So I don't know if you could do that nowadays. There's a lot of paranoia about, students, teachers, relationships, things like that. But mine were always, above board, totally, parents all notified what time we're leaving, what time we're coming back, the whole 9 yards. And I took kids to San Diego State football, to hockey games at our sports arena, Padre baseball. And eventually over the years, we worked it into a go out to dinner thing first, and then tour part of San Diego that the kids had never been in, where there was about a 35-story building we took them up in where they could view the city. And we went over the Coronado Bridge into Coronado. Most of them had not been on the bridge. And just over the years, lots and lots of experiences for kids that they never otherwise would have had. And it paid great dividends. I mean, I'm in touch with a number of my kids still. The first sixth graders I had in Chula Vista in 1973-74 are now 58 years old. And that boggles a lot of people's minds, because, that means they're ARP members or, basically almost senior citizens. And I'm still in touch with some of them.
Yeah, I'm 58 myself, so I remember back in those days and what school was like back then. Of course, that was before any of the modern technology that we have today that makes things so much easier to learn, I think, for students. Back then, it was pen and paper all the way. Plus, I was dyslexic, so I had a little bit of struggle there with that. Now, you taught, did you teach journalism, or did you teach English, or what?
Well, as an elementary teacher in California, we basically are responsible for everything unless the school decides to, divide things up and have one teacher teach several rounds of a certain subject to ease the burden on everybody. But we were responsible for everything: art, music, math, PE, reading. Everything was under our control. Responsibility, actually.
Yeah. I guess that makes it to where it doesn't get tiresome, because you're always changing your approach to how you're teaching, because you have to approach it in different ways for each subject matter. So you taught for 30 years. Why don't you give us some highlights and maybe the best and the worst that you've experienced? Because I'm sure you probably had some unruly students, and maybe some students who went well above the effort and did really well. And it's a good place to brag on them now if you remember them and their name. But go ahead and let us know a little bit about some of the hard things you went through and some of your most proudest moments.
Well, let's see. Do you want to start off with a couple really interesting students? That might be, those come to my mind a little more quickly. At Rosebank School in Chula Vista, I was there 11 years. I never should have left, but they put a new principal into the school that just had no interest in the school, and the school started to fall apart, and the staff, everybody transferred. But including myself. But anyway, one year in Chula Vista in Rosebank School, I had a young guy walk into class on the first day of school, and his name was Eli Ben Moshe, with a hyphen in his last name. He was born in Israel. His family then moved to Mexico City, and then eventually to Chula Vista. So Eli spoke Hebrew and Spanish, but no English. So back in that day, we didn't have any instructional aides or people to really help the kids that much with their English. So I speak some Spanish, and we put him next to, a couple kids that spoke Spanish fluently, and off we went. And he picked things up very quickly. It didn't take long to see that he was a very intelligent young kid. But the way that I knew that he had really mastered his English was one day, we used to let the kids play we had grass fields in Chula Vista. Most of the schools in San Diego have dirt and, kind of decomposed gravel, whatever. And we had grass, which was really nice. And we let the kids play football at recess and lunch, with the caveat that, hey, as long as there's no arguments and you guys keep the game under control and things, then you can do that. So one day after lunch, these kids would run out there and play football and come in just soaking wet, just, sweating like crazy. And they're all ready to come back in the classroom, but there's an argument going on. Something about whether somebody had stepped out of bounds or crossed the goal line or whatever. And Eli was arguing with the kids in English. And I just knew at that moment, wow, he's turned the corner. He's actually able to converse with the kids in English now. That's a major, major step. Well, Eli graduated from elementary school, went on to high school. By the way, I took a day off of work that year in 6th grade to go to his bar mitzvah. And he graduated from high school, didn't hear from him for a while, and one day in the mail came an invitation to a graduation ceremony for, I believe it was called the Pacific School of Optometry. And it was Eli Ben Moshe graduating. So we hooked up again, and basically Eli bought an optometry practice here in San Diego, a part of San Diego where I grew up, as a matter of fact, and he is now my optometrist. And all my eye care and everything is in Eli's hands. My exams, my glasses, everything that I've ever, had is now being handled by one of my former 6th graders. That's a story that's pretty amazing, pretty hard to have a lot of people be able to top one like that. There have been a lot of other kids that I've known real well. I've been to several weddings. I've been oddly enough to one funeral. I've been present when one of them, his wife was giving birth to their first baby. I've been invited to a number of things, and there's one family in particular where my family is kind of scattered and not all in one place and of one mind, I guess you'd say. So I actually spend a lot of my holidays with the family of one of my early 6th graders. He was a kid that was a little bit, he had a tough life at home, let's put it that way. A stern father, some other issues in the family that were tough. But he ended up going to a police academy and putting himself through the academy at his own expense, which normally the departments pay for you if you're already hired. And he got hired as a police officer, and I helped him through his academy when some of his assignments were tough, gave him ideas about how to do some of his written work and things like that. And I've been on ride-alongs with him in all the departments he's worked in, and he's now retired as a police officer after he was injured one time doing some detective work, and he's now the security director of a computer technology parts company up in the Los Angeles area, and doing really, really well. And he and I are actually almost best of friends from all the years. I've got one kid, though, that one of my former students started a restaurant up in North San Diego County called Death by Tequila. I think that's an interesting name for a restaurant. And I've had just all kinds of kids do all kinds of other things. One time I went to a play here in San Diego, a production of My Fair Lady. And I walked in and they gave us a program, and I sat down and opened it up before the play started. And one of my sixth graders was playing the lead role of Maria. I didn't even know I was seeing her perform. And she had a beautiful, beautiful voice. In her high school, she went to a school of performing arts, and she was named the outstanding performer at the school. And she now lives in Lake Tahoe. She has a son, and for a number of years, she was an entertainer aboard cruise ships. She'd be part of the group that did different shows every night on cruise ships. Her sister was a swimmer, and she went through a rough time in her life in which she kind of lost focus and got into drugs and alcohol and things like that, but she recovered and now is a swimmer in the Masters division. She's about 55 years old right now, but she's a swimmer in the Masters division, and she's in the International Swimming Hall of Fame, and an amazing swimmer. She has a company called the Aquatic Edge. Her name is Carlin Pipes, and she travels all over the world, literally, Dubai, all over Europe, South America, all over the U.S., putting on clinics showing even competitive swimmers how to speed up their, cut time off their races and things like that. That she's developed a technique that they will hire her to come and present to groups and teams and other swimmers because she has such a level of skill. So there are some kids I think that are probably somewhat remarkable.
Let me bring in real quick that
sure.
Your influence on children has been greatly respected, I'm sure, throughout your career. In fact, the publicist that I work with, who gets me a lot of my interviews, was one of your students, Steve Joyner.
Yes.
So do you remember him and how he was as a youngster?
Oh dear. And I'm laughing. When Steve first contacted me recently, I had to stop and think. I think over the years, if I take the kids that were in my class and then kids in other classes, because I tried to kind of, look around, see who else might need a little, TLC or something that might, help them a little bit. It took a minute to remember Steve, I'll be honest with you, and I would tell Steve the same thing. But Steve was there for part of fifth grade and then all of sixth grade, as I remember. He moved into the school area. Steve was, another one of a bunch of great kids. I mean, basically, I look back and there were few that were really hard to deal with or whatever. But part of that, I think, was my approach to the classroom and the way we handled our disciplinary thing and managed the classroom. But Steve was just another smiling guy out there that I think benefited from the time he spent with me. He tells me now how great of an influence I had on him, which is wonderful and, wonderful to hear. One of the things that he's happiest about was that in San Diego and Chula Vista, we don't have it anymore, unfortunately, but we had a sixth grade camp program. And the school, all the sixth graders would go up to camp in the mountains in San Diego County and live for a week in cabins with, supervision and all these activities to learn about nature and art involved with nature and community living, the animals of the region, snakes, things like that. It was a great experience. They had all-day hikes and they ate all together in a big dining area and family style at tables and that type of thing. But anyway, when Steve's first year in my class, it was a fifth and sixth grade combination. And I didn't want to stay home. I wanted to go to camp. So I swung a deal where we asked the fifth grade parents, do you mind if your child goes to camp with us? And Steve's mom said, no, go for it. And so Steve went to camp as a fifth grader, and then he got to go again as a sixth grader. So that's on one of the top of his list as one of the great things about his memories of school with in my classroom. So
that's excellent. I mean, that's as a child to be able to experience like something like that, like going to camp, is always a highlight, I think, in any child's experience or in their life so far.
I'm sure it made him as a fifth grader feel kind of special, to go with the sixth graders. And
yeah. So I'm sure you've had some difficult times in your career since you've, over 30 years. Why don't you talk a little bit about what you've gone through with maybe students cheating or having to break up any fights or things like that you may have experienced?
Well, I'll tell you, there are some kids, that are more disciplinary problems than others. Most of those kids I didn't have trouble with. I did have probably the worst difficulty I had one year was a girl in the class who was kind of a troublemaker ringleader type thing that got a couple of the other kids behind her, and she kind of had this little mini gang in the classroom, and that was tough to deal with that. In fact, her mother was a teacher, and I felt I should be able to solve everything that happened in the classroom. So when her mom came in for a conference one time to discuss some of the issues we're having, the mom said, well, I will be glad to take her out of the school and put her somewhere else. And I said, no. I said, you go ahead and leave her here. We'll work things out. But, just let you know that a lot of days it's tough trying to deal with, some of the things that she's orchestrating and all that. I had a philosophy with the kids that prevented a lot of that stuff. I had the concept that all the kids were equal, and kind of like now today we're talking about all lives matter, and in this case it was all the kids are equal. I tried to make them see that every one of them was gifted in some way, because they used to have classes for the gifted kids, or they'd come pull out kids to go to gifted class, and the other kids would say, Mr. Hopkins, why don't we get to go to that? And I would explain to them that, unfortunately, these are kids who are identified as gifted based on a test, a written test. You are gifted, but in a way that apparently they haven't discovered yet, and maybe you haven't discovered. Your gift may be in art. Your gift may be in auto mechanics. Your gift may be in fly fishing. But whatever your gift is, you might not have found it yet. And that's part of your job in life, is to find out what those gifts are and work on those, but also find out what your weaknesses are and work on those as well, so that you end up as a well-rounded person that doesn't really have any areas that you feel uncomfortable with, whether it be writing or reading or math or whatever skill it might be, or just general knowledge. So we did that, and also everything in the class we did was please and thank you. I told them that goes for me as well as you. I'm the teacher, and I expect to be respected, of course, but I'm going to speak to you like a young adult, not like a child. It's never going to be boys and girls. I talk to everybody like they were intelligent young adults, and that went a long way. The other thing that I did that was really, really a big factor, when people would ask me how the class would run so well and the kids got along so well and they would obey other teachers on the campus so well, I boiled it down as really simple. I took an interest in every kid's life, something that sometimes their parents didn't even have time to do at home with all the modern, both parents working, everybody's under stress and all that. If one of the kids said that they had a Little League game after school, oh, that sounds really great. Hey, well, good luck. The next day, I'd make a point of walking over and pulling out a chair when the kids were quiet doing something, and sitting down saying, hey, how'd the game go last night? Did you get up at bat? Did you get a hit? Oh, okay, that's great. Hey, and that's a lot of that type of thing went a long way with kids, that they knew that you knew about them out of class, you cared about them, you cared about their life, and you wanted to kind of see how everything was going to turn out. So there weren't a lot of negatives. There were some other things we did that solved some problems, and this isn't a problem maybe like you described a moment ago, but once in a while there would come up a situation where maybe somebody was getting teased a lot. And one of the girls that was getting teased Her name was Aubrey Franklin. I still remember that very clearly. And she lived out in a part of Chula Vista, an area called Bonita. And it was an area where they had larger properties and they were allowed to have horses. So Aubrey had a horse, and Aubrey went into competitions where they'd jump, and she wore the complete riding outfit and all that. And I think the kids were probably a little bit jealous, and so she got teased, and they'd make horse sounds when she walked by and paw at the ground like they were horses and stuff. And it was something that had hurt her, for several years at school. So we set up, I talked to her and I talked to her mom. We set up a deal where they brought her horse to school one day in a trailer. Like I mentioned, we had grass playgrounds. So we went out on the playground. She and her mom went out early, and they set up a couple jumps. And she went in and put her outfit on. And we had invited all the classes that wanted to come out and watch, let them know, hey, we're going to have a horse jumping demonstration at 9:30, whatever. We had about 200 or 300 kids out there watching. And she got on her horse and rode around the grass and jumped the horse and did all this stuff. And afterwards, the kids went up and were all petting the horse. And that ended the teasing. That ended all the whatever she'd experienced before kind of just evaporated. So things like, there's ways to solve problems like that. They aren't always easy, but, you put a little thinking into it and do a little talking, and somehow most of them can be solved. And you just don't have as many of the angry kids, the ones that are difficult.
Yeah, that's awesome that the solutions that you could come up with to alleviate either bullying or children being picked on and so forth. I know that bullying is such a big thing right now. I mean, it's always been around. Back when I was in school, I was bullied. But it seems like it's getting even worse because now it's moved over from school to the internet to so many other realms. So it's not like a student can come home and then the bullying stops because they're away from that environment. It's where they get bullied at school, they come home and they get bullied on the internet by the same bullies who are treating them badly at school.
Well, same boys or girls. The girls can probably be even meaner than the boys because they tend to go for looks and clothing and appearances and family resources and anything they can to tear a kid down. And I just can't even imagine how difficult that can be nowadays. We did something that was kind of neat that in our classroom that kind of spoke to that a little bit too. I have a master's in counseling, so I'm really interested in talking about feelings and about the way we deal with things and that type of thing. So I came up with this idea where I bought a bunch of posters. They were about 18 by 24 inches. And I've got a couple of plexiglass frames for them that I could change out real quickly. And every Wednesday, I'd put a poster up in the classroom, a new poster. And the kids would copy the poster down on a little assignment sheet that I had. And I'm sure the parents, some of them probably hated this, some of them probably loved it. They were asked to go home and discuss the quote on the poster with their parents, if the parents were willing to discuss with them. And ask the parents, how did this quote affect your life? Talk to the parents about how it's affecting their life, back and forth. And on Thursdays, they came back and they wrote in their journals what they had learned about that quote. Now, if the parents had said, I'll share this with you, but please don't share it with your class, we told the kids, you need to respect that. Don't share anything that your parents asked you not to. And on Friday morning, after we got the day started, we'd push all the desks in the class back to the walls, and everybody would sit in a big circle. And kids would share what they'd learned about the quote, and then I would model, in the early part of the year, ways to ask them questions and ways to challenge what they said or whatever without attacking, to give feedback in a non-threatening way. And we had some really, really great discussions during those times that were the kids learned a lot about their parents that they might not have ever learned for years or ever. The kids learned from each other. They learned that the experiences they're going through were the same as what other kids were going through. Many, many things came out of that. Excuse me. One a simple idea for a poster would be, they had a picture on one of this cartoon character, a man's head from the side. In his nose was a big spigot, and there was yellow liquid coming out. And the quote said, one that everybody's heard, said, "When life gives you lemons, make lemonade." So I talked to the kids and said, how has life given you lemons so far? What are some of the lemons that have happened? Well, for a lot of kids, it was divorce, moving when they didn't want to, somebody in their family died, whatever the case it was. I said, I'd like you to go home and talk to your parents, because they've had lemons in their life too. If you don't know about these, ask them what some of their lemons were, some of the things that have happened to them that were disappointing or heartbreaking or upsetting. But the really important part is ask them how they made lemonade out of it, how they made a solution, a way to deal with it, a way to be at peace with it, whatever it might be, to move forward and in their life and, go on. So those kinds of discussions started some really, really neat talking. And these are sixth graders too. One thing that I had noticed over the years is nobody ever asked the kids how they felt about something. It was always a right and wrong answer, but never, how are you feeling about this? What's your response to this? How do you, is this fair? Is this unfair? Whatever the case might be. So with all these things together we've talked about, it was mainly the class would turn into a family of 32, myself and 31 kids. And, we had some really, really great experiences. So the need to have to play tough or, hardball against some kids was hardly ever happened. I mean, there was a good feeling in the classroom, and they were the kind of kids that ended up going around the school helping other people without being told, and just, pitching in because they knew it was the right thing to do.
How difficult was it for you to finally retire after being in the field of education for so long? Did you feel like you lost a part of yourself, or was it at a point where you were ready for it and looking forward to whatever happens next in your life?
Well, I'll tell you what happened, and this for your listeners, this will give them a good idea of what the education field can be like. And I don't share this story with everybody, but after I'd been in this for about 25 years, we had a change of superintendents in the school district. I'm not going to say her name, but they brought in this lady who subscribed, I was told she subscribed what she called I can't remember the name, the something theory, where you come into an organization and you blow it up, and as the parts fall back to the ground, they fall into a better pattern than it was before. There's some name for that. So she was all about changing the school district, and one of her things was that seniority, which was our criteria for virtually everything, should be eliminated because people that had been around a long time were less worthy, tired, not as effective anymore, and things like that, which I, of course, strongly disagreed with. So that seniority used to be the primary determining factor in transfer, for example. So if they had an opening at a school and 10 people applied for it, they'd look at all the years of hire date, and the person with the most seniority automatically got the job. Bingo, it's their job. But she wanted to change that. So one day I was outside of a school at the Halloween carnival, and I was playing Mr. Host or whatever, and I had this electric megaphone, and I was, calling people, come on over to the cakewalk, that kind of stuff. And she comes to the carnival and walks up, and she says, "Hello, Mr. Hopkins." And I said, "Oh, hello, Dr. whatever her name was." And she started off a conversation. "Don't you think that seniority is a terrible thing and a bad way to handle transfers and things like that?" And I was very polite. I said, "Well, Doctor, I said, I'm sorry, but I said, I think that seniority is the best way to handle these situations. And I'll tell you why." I said, myself and a number of the teachers of this school have many, many years of experience, but I think most of them bounce out of bed every morning with the same enthusiasm, the same energy level, the same and more expertise possibly than a lot of the younger, newer teachers. And to say that because somebody is senior is now ineffective or whatever, that I don't agree with that. I think that the senior teachers oftentimes are some of your very best. Well, that was the wrong answer. And from that point on, and I say this in all sincerity, I might as well have worn a sweatshirt with a target on the back. She held grudges and she took one out on me. And it got to the situation, Michael, where you could be an excellent teacher at a school, doing a great job and everything going smoothly, very effective. But if you didn't agree with her, you were terrible. And if you were a poor teacher, ineffective and things weren't going real well, your class was kind of out of control and all this, but you agreed with her, then you were a shining star. It was a complete reversal or a complete scattering of evaluations based on whether you agreed with her views on seniority or other things that she was trying to push. And basically, I was transferred down to the school district office the last several years of my career and put into a department where there was really nothing to do. And the things that there were to do, I was not trained in, so it was very awkward for me. And my last several years in the district were not enjoyable, were not something I can look back on and say that I look back with great memories at all. My best memories came the 31 or so years I was in the classroom where there was direct interaction with the kids and the students, and that energy, that happiness, that environment every day that was so stimulating for me, and I hope for them too. So that happens out there to teachers all over the United States all the time. It's a game of politics sometimes, and the person with the most power wins. And it's sad to say that's how my career ended.
Well, what is your passion now that you've retired and you probably have more time to yourself? What really floats your boat now?
Good question. I do a lot of photography, which I started doing as an eighth grader myself. I bought a developing kit at Sears and a $40 enlarger, and I started printing photos, black and white photos, in my parents' house as an eighth grader. I still take photos for the newspaper that I contribute to. So photography has remained special. Travel is also special. And probably the biggest thing in my life right now, if I really had to sit down and think about it, is that about 25 years ago, I started going down to Puerto Vallarta in Mexico. And in doing so, I was with a couple other teachers, and we met an 8-year-old kid down there that was diving in a river for coins that people were throwing out of a restaurant. And we befriended that kid. I kept going back. My other teacher friends didn't. And I've become a part of their kind of family, so to speak. They live south of Puerto Vallarta, about 15 miles south, off of a dirt road that just goes off into the hills. And they have an extended family of about probably 40 people that live in the Puerto Vallarta area. And when I go down to the Puerto Vallarta now, I spend a lot of my time with their family in their homes, taking them places. Now, the event that just happened just yesterday, I did this. One of the boys in the family, young men, his wife gave birth to their second child 2 weeks ago, and it was a young boy, and he was born with club feet, if you know what those are. And so they're just beside themselves. They're not working. They have no insurance. They have no income whatsoever. So they went to a doctor who gave them a quote of how much it would cost to cast his feet over the next several months and try and correct his feet. And yesterday I withdrew the money and sent it down to them via Western Union. to Puerto Vallarta so they can start getting their son's, feet corrected. Also, in that same family, for the last 3+ years, I've been putting one of the really, really neat young guys there through a university. He'll be the first person in the entire extended family ever to go to university. So that's exciting. I'm real happy about that. And he's getting closer and closer to graduation. So I'm always excited to, help him. I send him money every semester to pay his fees. And so that's kind of a passion right now, I think, is my extended family down in Puerto Vallarta.
Yeah, it's something about teaching. It's more than just teaching somebody. It's a willingness to help somebody grow. And it seems like that's something that you've carried on past your teaching days and have continued to experience with the people you meet, that you just want to help in some way if you can. I think that's very admirable.
Oh, thanks. These people are especially interesting. In the time I've known them, about 25, 26 years now, they've lived in 4 different houses. But the original family, a mom, a dad, and 3 kids, are now in their 4th house, but it's the first house they've ever actually owned. They bought a little tiny lot, built on it. They've expanded it over the years. But even now, to date, they have no telephone, no car, no running water. They actually have a TV with a satellite dish, of all things, that one of the boys saved up some money years ago and bought. But basically, it's a very simple life for them. They don't have even the things that we have. They do all have cell phones. I think that's interesting. But there's no signal except down right near the highway. So we communicate. When they walk down by the highway, we can send messages back and forth and photos and all that. But the rest of the time, they're out in a little dirt, off this little dirt road, and sometimes dinner's cooked over an open fire and things like that. Tortillas are handmade, and very interesting lifestyle. But they're the nicest people you'd ever want to meet. They're down to earth. Wonderful people. They're good people. When we first met this kid as an 8-year-old, one of the things he did, the other teachers that were with me were ladies, 2 other ladies, and he treated them like he was a professional butler or something. I mean, the way he took us on a little tour of the area as an 8-year-old, and would extend his hand when there was a little water to walk through or things like that to offer the ladies. And it just struck me like something is special about this kid. And it's because he's in a family that they taught the kids from the time they were young to be polite and to help people and go out of their way. And they're great people. I mean, I just can't say enough about them, and how hard they work and how much they care about things. Another story about them, just real quick, is that they took ice cold showers and baths for all these years up until about 9 months ago. I also bought for them a small hot water heater. And up until then, even when it was the dead of winter, and I guess it gets pretty cold down there at times, they were taking buckets of, little plastic buckets of water and pouring it over their head, ice cold water, to take showers for years and years and years. And for the first time, the last, 9 months or so, they can go in and turn on the water and it's warm. And now are taking warm showers for the first time ever. So it's a great feeling to be able to do that with, some of my money. And I don't think I could think of a better way to spend it. And I'm just happy to be able to do that for them. I only go down twice a year usually, but it's just really special. Really, it's kind of one of my passions, I guess you'd say too.
Okay, to close this out, why don't you let somebody say, for instance, somebody is thinking about going into education. They're in college right now and they're considering doing an education career. What nuggets of wisdom would you impart to that person and to kind of help them guide their way through the education system?
Oh, good question. A tough one too, Michael. The teaching profession is greatly different now than it was when I was going through. I think, my opinion, a lot of the teachers' creativity has been taken away. It's like you say, it's a technological world now, but a lot of people have tried to legislate education. Legislators who've never been in the classroom try to make rules and policies. And I think now the teaching is regulated to where they tell you what to teach, how to teach it, and when to teach it. And it's almost like as a teacher, you're a deliverer of instruction rather than a teacher, if that makes sense. There still is the interaction with the students. And for that reason, I think teaching will always be a good profession. You'll always have the chance to change lives, to steer people in better directions, to give them motivation to reach higher goals, that type of thing. But the actual teaching part may be difficult. The technology part is amazing. They have these in the high school that I cover. They have what they call a Promethean board in their classrooms now, which is a computer screen the size of a movie screen, a computer screen, but it's also a whiteboard that teachers can write on. So, for example, if they're talking about, President Reagan's speech at the Berlin Wall years ago. Well, most of the high school kids weren't even alive then. They don't know what the teachers are talking about that much. All the teacher has to do is go on his computer and type in a couple of keystrokes, and boom, there's President Reagan up on this screen delivering the speech. They can hear it, they can see it, they can feel the what it's like to hear, the mood, everything, and it's right there for them. So there's a tremendous opportunity for kids to learn nowadays. I would just hope that there's still enough leeway, enough wiggle room for the teachers to be creative and do their own things as well. That's probably about the best I can say. I still recommend teachers young people go into the profession. It's still worthwhile. They used to always say that the best 3 things about teaching are June, July, and August. But it's still an honorable profession, and one that I think would leave most people feeling good about themselves. Hopefully they'll make enough money that they can afford a house and a car and some nice things in it, because the starting salaries, even though they've been legislated up to a higher level, are still low by most community standards.
I want to give a shout out to Ben, the editor of this show. Ben also has a podcast called 2 Marks and a Spark. You can find it wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Check it out. You won't be sorry.